My girlfriend texted her ex, "I'll dump this boring loser once he gets his money." I printed a faker's notice and watched her pack her bags the very next day. My name is Liam. I am 32 years old, and I work as an aviation mechanic at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. My job involves grueling, physically demanding shifts, often starting hours before the sun comes up or ending long after midnight. I spend my days deep inside the noisy, cavernous bowels of commercial jets, running complex diagnostics on hydraulic systems, inspecting heavy landing gear, and ensuring that hundreds of people make it to their destinations safely. It is a loud, incredibly dirty, and highly structured environment that smells constantly of jet fuel and ozone. But honestly, it fits my personality perfectly. I am a deeply methodical guy. I like routines. I like knowing exactly what to expect from my day. My life outside of work is just as predictable. I rent a modest, slightly cramped apartment in the Logan Square neighborhood. My daily routine rarely deviates from a set schedule. Wake up, commute to the airport, work a 10-hour shift, hit the local gym for 45 minutes of weightlifting, buy groceries, cook a simple dinner, and go to sleep. I don't use social media much, maybe scrolling through Reddit or watching a few YouTube videos on the weekend, but I never post about my life. I have always been the reliable, predictable, and admittedly boring type of guy. For a long time, I genuinely thought my girlfriend appreciated that stability. Her name is Chloe. She is 27 and works as a dermatology nurse at a high-end, incredibly busy private clinic downtown. We had been together for just over 3 years when my entire world turned upside down. For the last 14 months of our relationship, she had essentially been living at my apartment full-time. Her electric toothbrush was in my holder. Her expensive, glass-bottled skincare products completely dominated the bathroom counter, and her clothes took up 70% of the bedroom closet space, even though the lease was strictly under my name and she never officially paid rent. Chloe was the exact opposite of me in almost every conceivable way. She had a massive, vibrant, exhausting personality. She thrived on chaos and high energy. She loved trendy, overcrowded downtown restaurants where you had to yell across the table just to hear each other over the thumping music. She constantly wanted to go on spontaneous, expensive weekend trips, and her phone was practically glued to her hand as she documented every single aesthetic moment of her life on Instagram and TikTok. I am a low-key guy, but for a long time, I believed our differences created a healthy, functioning balance. I thought my calm demeanor grounded her, and I thought she brought a necessary spark of excitement into my otherwise monotonous life. However, there was one specific detail that would eventually become the absolute catalyst for the destruction of our relationship. My grandfather. He passed away about 14 months ago. We were incredibly close, and losing him was a massive emotional blow to me. In his will, he left me a substantial inheritance. It wasn't by a private island and retire money, but it was around $350,000 more than enough to completely change the financial trajectory of my life. The legal process surrounding the estate was agonizingly slow. Probate courts, tax clearances, family lawyer meetings, and endless bureaucratic red tape meant the funds hadn't been finalized or distributed yet. It was never a secret. I had mentioned it to Chloe casually a few times, mostly because the endless paperwork kept dragging on, and my family kept bringing it up during phone calls. Chloe knew the exact rough estimate of the amount because I had excitedly talked to her about my ultimate dream of using it as a massive cash down payment on a solid, permanent house somewhere in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs outside of Chicago. I wanted a 2-car garage, a backyard, and a place to truly call my own. She seemed fully on board with this dream, often sending me Zillow links to properties she liked. Up until a few weeks ago, I had absolutely no reason to suspect anything was critically wrong with our relationship. Sure, there were small, nagging annoyances, but nothing that screamed major toxic crisis. Chloe could be incredibly sharp-tongued and irritable when she was stressed from dealing with difficult patients at the clinic. She frequently complained that my life was far too predictable and stagnant. She would roll her eyes and joke to our mutual friends that dating me felt like dating a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. I usually just swallowed my pride, forced a smile, and ignored those comments. I figured it was just her way of venting, and her sour moods usually passed quickly after a glass of wine. The exact moment my entire perception of reality shattered happened on a totally random, unremarkable Tuesday night. It was raining outside. A cold, miserable Chicago drizzle beating against the living room window. Chloe had fallen asleep on my couch while scrolling on her phone. The television was playing some random true crime documentary in the background at a low volume. I was sitting in the armchair across from her, reading a paperback novel. Suddenly, the screen of her phone lit up in the dim, shadowed room. Normally, I am a fierce advocate for personal privacy. I have never been the jealous, snooping boyfriend type. I had never once asked to look through her phone or questioned who she was texting late at night. But the name that popped up on the illuminated screen was a name I recognized instantly, and it made my stomach drop into my shoes. It was Marcus. Marcus was Chloe's ex-boyfriend. I had heard his name a few times during the first few months of our relationship. According to Chloe, they had dated for about 2 years, and the relationship had ended in a spectacular, fiery disaster. She had always described Marcus as an immature, narcissistic, manipulative, and completely unreliable loser who couldn't hold down a job. Because of the sheer vitriol and disgust she used whenever his name came up, I naturally assumed she had completely severed all contact with him years ago. Apparently, I was a naive, trusting idiot. The preview text that appeared on her locked screen didn't just mention a casual, "hello" or "how are you?" It specifically mentioned my inheritance. The words jumped out at me like a physical slap to the face. I froze in my chair. My heart started pounding against my ribs so hard and fast that I could actually hear the blood rushing in my ears. I put my book down on the coffee table, stood up slowly, and quietly walked over to the couch. I picked up her phone. I knew her passcode. She had freely given it to me a year ago to change a Spotify playlist while she was driving on the highway. I typed the 6 digits in, my hands trembling slightly with adrenaline, and opened the message thread. What I read in that conversation completely, irrevocably destroyed how I viewed the last 3 years of my life. It took exactly 30 seconds to realize I had been living a pathetic lie. I didn't scroll all the way up to read their entire history. I didn't need to torture myself. The most recent exchange was damning enough. The message that had originally caught my attention was a reply to something Chloe had sent earlier that evening while I was cooking dinner in the kitchen. I read her outgoing text first. "I'm literally just waiting until he gets his grandfather's inheritance money. Once that clears and we have the cash, I'll finally dump this boring loser and we can be together properly. Just hold on a little longer." I read that sentence 3 times. My brain simply refused to process the words on the screen. It felt like I was reading a foreign language. Boring loser, dump him, be together. Marcus's reply, the one that had lit up the screen and caught my eye, read, "Lamau. Good plan, babe. You deserve better anyway. Any idea how much cash is actually coming down the pipeline?" Chloe had responded immediately before falling asleep on the couch. "He has absolutely no clue what's really going on with us. He's so predictable and easy to manage. I've already put up with his depressing routine this long, so waiting a little longer for a massive 6-figure payout is not a big deal. Just be patient with me." I stood there in the quiet living room, the harsh blue light of the phone screen illuminating my face, and I just stopped breathing for a moment. I carefully locked the phone and gently placed it exactly where I had found it, right next to her limp hand. I walked back to my armchair, sat down heavily, and stared blankly at the wall. The strangest part of that entire night was my emotional reaction. I didn't feel explosive, blinding rage. I didn't feel the sudden urge to scream, throw things, or smash the television into pieces. Instead, it felt like a massive, heavy industrial switch had been flipped inside my brain, instantly shutting down all the chaotic, painful emotions and leaving behind a state of absolute, chilling, mechanical clarity. Everything became incredibly simple. 3 years of shared memories suddenly recontextualized themselves in my mind. A barrage of small, seemingly harmless moments suddenly lined up perfectly to form a horrifying, undeniable picture. Chloe constantly pushing me to talk about the exact dollar amount of the inheritance. Chloe nagging me about when the probate lawyers would finally finish the endless paperwork. Chloe making jokes about how lavish and luxurious our lifestyle would be once the massive check finally showed up in my bank account. At the time, I had foolishly assumed she was just being highly supportive and excited for our shared future. Now, sitting in the dark, those memories sounded completely sinister. She wasn't excited for times me. She was auditing my net worth to see if her time investment was going to pay off before she abandoned ship. I looked over at the couch. Chloe was still fast asleep, breathing softly, looking completely innocent and peaceful. I could have walked over, shaken her awake, shoved the illuminated phone in her face, and aggressively demanded an explanation. But I knew exactly how that would play out. It would turn into a massive, hysterical screaming match. She would cry fake tears, she would try to gaslight me, she would claim it was just a stupid joke to make her ex jealous, or she would say she was just stringing Marcus along for validation. It would be hours of exhausting, dramatic, manipulative denial, and the more I sat there, staring at her, the less interested I was in arguing with a liar. If Chloe's entire master plan hinged entirely on my inheritance arriving before she met me, then this situation actually handed me an incredibly unique opportunity. I had a very clear, definitive way to test her true intentions, and to end things entirely on my own terms without shedding a single tear. Instead of confronting her, I decided to run a psychological experiment. The idea came to me the next morning while I was at work, and it was almost too beautifully convenient to ignore. I went through my shift at the airport like a total zombie, my hands going through the mechanical motions of tightening bolts and checking fluid levels while my brain ran complex simulations of the situation. I kept hearing her exact words echoing in my head over the deafening roar of the jet engines. Predictable. Easy to manage. A boring loser she was temporarily tolerating for financial gain. When someone you love secretly views you that way, it either destroys your self-esteem completely or it makes you incredibly cold and calculated. For me, it was the latter. I realized I didn't need a complicated, convoluted revenge plot. I just needed to remove the one thing keeping her anchored to my apartment. If her entire relationship with me was currently dependent on the expectation of a massive payday, then removing that expectation should instantly alter her behavior. Around my lunch break, sitting in the noisy, crowded employee cafeteria, the plan fully formed in my mind. I wouldn't say a single word about Marcus or the devastating text messages. Instead, I would fabricate a catastrophic financial roadblock. I would create a scenario where it appeared that the inheritance had not only been delayed, but was potentially gone forever, swallowed up by the government. When I got home to the apartment that evening, Chloe was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping a large glass of expensive red wine, aggressively scrolling through TikTok, and complaining loudly about a patient at her dermatology clinic who had fiercely argued over a Botox billing discrepancy. She greeted me with her usual casual, "Hey babe, how was work?" There was absolutely no tension in her voice, no guilt in her eyes. She was in a fantastic, chatty mood. That single, mundane interaction confirmed everything I needed to know. She truly had absolutely no idea that I had seen her messages to Marcus. She thought her toxic secret was perfectly safe. Later that night, while Chloe was taking a long, hot shower, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and got to work. I spent about 45 minutes carefully crafting a document that looked terrifyingly official. I Googled standard IRS audit notice formatting, downloaded a high-resolution government logo, and used formal, bureaucratic legal jargon I found on tax forums. I typed up a devastating, highly detailed letter addressed to me, claiming that there was an active, high-level federal tax evasion investigation involving my late grandfather's estate distribution. The narrative of the fake letter was simple but lethal. According to the Internal Revenue Service, all inheritance funds were immediately frozen, pending a comprehensive, multi-year audit due to severe filing discrepancies connected to unreported offshore assets. In plain English, the money was locked down by the federal government, and it might never see the light of day. I printed the letter on crisp, thick white paper, folded it precisely into thirds to make it look like it had arrived in a standard business envelope, and left it sitting right in the center of my wooden desk in the living room. It was positioned in a way that made it absolutely impossible for her to miss when she walked by. I didn't say a single word about it to her before we went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. for my early airport shift. I quietly got dressed in the dark, left the apartment before Chloe even stirred in the bed, and drove to work. I spent the entire day anticipating her reaction. I honestly expected that she would call me in an absolute panic, or at least bring it up with genuine, loving concern when I got home. I thought maybe she would try to comfort me over this massive, life-altering financial loss. I was wrong. What actually happened was so much colder, more direct, and more ruthless than I could have ever imagined. I unlocked the door to the apartment around 6 p.m. The atmosphere inside was instantly suffocating. Chloe was sitting stiffly on the living room couch, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, her face set in a hard, rigid, deeply unhappy expression. She barely even glanced up from the floor when I walked through the door. Normally, she would immediately launch into a rapid-fire monologue about her day, gossiping about her coworkers or complaining about city traffic. Today, she just stared blankly at the television screen, which wasn't even turned on, and muttered a flat, monotone "hey." I immediately glanced over at my desk. The fake IRS letter had been moved. It was no longer perfectly centered, it was slightly askew, and the crease was flattened. She had absolutely read it. I played my part perfectly. I dropped my heavy keys on the kitchen counter, sighed heavily like a man carrying the weight of the world, and asked if everything was okay. She shrugged her shoulders sharply and snapped that she was just exhausted from the clinic. Her tone was frigid, completely devoid of any affection. Then, she went straight for the kill. She didn't even try to ease into the topic. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing into tiny slits, and asked, "So, have you heard anything new from your lawyers about the estate paperwork?" I shook my head, aggressively rubbing my temples like a highly stressed out man. "No. Actually, it's turning into a total nightmare. Did you see that weird letter on my desk this morning? Apparently, the IRS is auditing the whole estate. They think my grandpa hid some assets, and now the entire inheritance is completely frozen under federal review." I acted incredibly confused and frustrated, playing the role of a naive guy who just thought it was a minor, annoying bureaucratic headache that would eventually pass. Chloe did not react the way a loving, supportive partner normally would. She didn't stand up to hug me. She didn't ask how I was feeling about the overwhelming stress. She didn't offer a single word of comfort. Instead, her posture became incredibly rigid, and she immediately started interrogating me with aggressive, highly specific, panicked questions. "Frozen? What do you mean frozen? For how long? Are we talking months? Years? Is the money gone?" Her voice was rising in pitch, the sheer panic thinly veiled behind her mounting anger. I looked at her sadly and shrugged my shoulders. "I honestly have no idea, Chloe. You know how government investigations are. My lawyer called today and said it could take 3 to 5 years to untangle the mess. And even then, the back taxes and federal penalties might wipe out the entire amount completely. It's basically gone for the foreseeable future. We're just going to have to keep renting and saving up the hard way." The exact moment those words left my mouth, I physically watched the remaining warmth completely drain out of her body. Her entire demeanor shifted instantly from tense to hostile. She stood up abruptly, muttered something completely unintelligible about needing to lay down, and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door shut forcefully behind her. The rest of the evening was agonizingly awkward. Chloe absolutely refused to eat the dinner I cooked. She stayed locked in the bedroom, furiously texting on her phone. At one point, I walked past the door to go to the bathroom and clearly heard her hushed, frantic whispering on a phone call. I couldn't make out the exact words through the wood, but the panicked, angry tone was unmistakable. She was definitely talking to Marcus, updating him on the catastrophic failure of their financial plan. By the time we finally went to sleep, the bed felt like a frozen, hostile wasteland. We lay as far apart as physically possible, staring at opposite walls. But the true climax of my experiment happened the very next morning. I woke up at my usual early hour, but Chloe was already out of bed. I walked into the kitchen and found her sitting at the island, fully dressed in her scrubs, holding a mug of black coffee. She had a very serious, deeply rehearsed, cold expression on her face. She looked at me and said the 4 most dreaded words in any relationship: "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was an absolute masterclass in manipulation, and it lasted exactly 15 minutes. After 3 years of shared history, expensive vacations, family holidays, and living together in my apartment, she severed our lives in the time it takes to brew a fresh pot of coffee. Chloe didn't waste any time beating around the bush. She launched into a carefully prepared, highly sanitized speech, her voice steady and completely devoid of any genuine emotion. She told me that she had been doing a lot of deep soul-searching lately, and that she felt our relationship had become incredibly stale and unfulfilling. She claimed that over the last year, we had fundamentally grown into 2 completely different people, and she was no longer sure if our dynamic was healthy for her personal growth. I stood there, leaning casually against the kitchen counter, listening silently without interrupting a single word. The sheer audacity of her timing was astounding. Just 48 hours earlier, she had been totally normal, cheerfully drinking wine and planning our future. But now, with the inheritance money supposedly vaporized by the IRS, she was suddenly suffocating in a stale environment that was holding her back. She continued her ridiculous monologue, stating that she felt trapped in a monotonous routine that was draining her happiness. She said she desperately needed more excitement and passion in her life. And then she delivered the exact phrase I knew was coming. "Liam, I'm sorry, but you're just too predictable for me. I need someone who challenges me." Predictable. The exact word she had typed to Marcus. At that exact moment, I possessed all the ammunition I needed to absolutely destroy her. I knew the real, pathetic reason for this sudden, urgent breakup. I could have pulled out my phone, quoted her texts word for word, and watched her crumble into a state of humiliated, weeping panic. But I didn't. I let her finish her hypocritical, self-righteous speech. Eventually, she sighed dramatically, looked down at her coffee mug, and concluded that it would be best for both of our mental health if we separated immediately, before things became messy and resentful. I looked at her, keeping my face perfectly neutral, and asked a few calm, probing questions just to see how deep the lies went. "Did something specific happen this week to trigger this?" I asked softly, pretending to be hurt. She shook her head emphatically, her eyes wide with fake sincerity. No. It's nothing you did recently. It's just been building up over time. Is there someone else, Chloe? Are you leaving me for another guy?" Her reaction was Oscar-worthy. She gasped slightly, her eyes widening in mock offense, her hand flying to her chest. "Liam, absolutely not. I can't believe you would even accuse me of something like that right now. This is exactly why we aren't working. You don't trust me at all." The sheer brazenness of the denial was almost impressive, considering I had literally read her promising to dump me for Marcus just 2 nights ago. Then she dropped the final hammer, confirming everything. She insisted that to make this as painless as possible, she wanted a clean, immediate break. She didn't want to drag out a painful cohabitation while we figured things out. She wanted out times today. I nodded slowly, letting a moment of silence pass between us. "I understand, Chloe. If you feel that strongly about it, and you're this deeply unhappy, there is absolutely no point in me arguing or begging you to stay." My calm, highly accepting response clearly threw her off balance. I could see a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes. I think she had fully anticipated a massive, weeping meltdown. She expected me to drop to my knees, beg for a second chance, and promise to completely change my personality. Instead, I simply looked at my watch and asked, "When are you planning to move your boxes out?" Chloe blinked rapidly, recovered her composure, and coldly stated that she would pack a large bag today, stay with a girlfriend from the clinic, and come back with a U-Haul over the weekend while I was at work to get the rest of her furniture and clothes. By the time I returned from my long shift the following Monday evening, the apartment was half empty. All her expensive skincare bottles were gone. Her massive wardrobe was cleared out. The silence in the apartment was deafening, but it wasn't a sad, lonely silence. It was the peaceful, quiet relief of a massive, malignant tumor being successfully excised from my life. For the first couple of weeks after Chloe moved out, I threw myself entirely into my routine. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. The breakup had been so shockingly surgical and completely devoid of dramatic screaming matches. She just packed up and vanished, the absolute second she believed the money was gone. That action alone was all the closure I needed. I never felt the urge to text her, and I certainly never told her I knew about Marcus. She had made her choice based on the fake reality I presented, and I was free. Ironically, she had seemed almost giddy with relief during her final hours of packing. She thought she had executed a flawless, clean exit strategy, escaping a boring mechanic with a frozen bank account to run back into the exciting arms of her ex. A few days later, life delivered the ultimate, glorious punchline. The actual, highly anticipated inheritance paperwork finally cleared probate court. The estate lawyers finished their grueling processing. The tax clearances were officially approved by the state without a single issue, and the funds were legally transferred directly into my primary savings account. Seeing that massive 6-figure balance on my banking app was totally surreal. It was more than enough for a massive down payment. Without telling a single soul, I immediately contacted a real estate agent. Over the next 3 weeks, I aggressively toured properties in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Oak Park, just outside the city limits. I found exactly what I had been dreaming of. A beautiful, newly renovated 3-bedroom house with a massive 2-car garage, a sprawling green backyard, and a stunning wraparound porch. It was absolutely perfect. I made a huge cash down payment, the sellers accepted immediately, and we fast-tracked the entire closing process. About a month after Chloe had walked out of my life, I stood on the front porch of my brand new property with the shiny brass keys in my hand. The feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. I decided it was finally time to close the trap. I pulled out my phone, snapped a very simple, high-quality photo of the beautiful house exterior with my hand holding the keys in the foreground. I opened Instagram, an app I hadn't posted on in nearly 2 years, and uploaded the photo to my main feed in my story. The caption was short, humble, and devastatingly effective. Finally closed on the dream house. The inheritance paperwork took forever to clear, but it was absolutely worth the wait. New beginnings in Oak Park. I didn't tag Chloe. I didn't write anything petty, angry, or dramatic. I just stated the absolute facts and hit publish. The explosion happened faster than my brain could even process. Within exactly 42 minutes, Chloe reacted. First, the tiny notification popped up showing she had viewed my Instagram story. I chuckled to myself, knowing she was probably stalking my page out of sheer curiosity to see how miserable I was without her. Then, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. A text message from Chloe. "Wait, what? You bought a house?" I stared at the screen, a massive grin spreading across my face, and deliberately swiped the notification away. I did not reply. 3 minutes later, another rapid-fire text. "Liam, I thought you said the inheritance was frozen by the IRS? What is going on?" That specific message actually made me laugh out loud in my empty new kitchen. Technically, if we were splitting hairs in a court of law, I had never once explicitly stated that the IRS investigation was real. I had simply printed a piece of paper, left it on a desk, and acted slightly annoyed about it. She had filled in all the blanks with her own blinding greed and panic. The floodgates opened. My phone started vibrating nonstop. When did this get resolved? Why didn't you tell me the money was cleared? Liam, please answer me. How long have you been looking at houses in Oak Park? We talked about moving there. I left her on read. The sheer, palpable desperation radiating through the screen was intoxicating. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. Chloe's face flashed on the screen. I silenced it and let it go straight to voicemail. She called again. And again. 4 missed calls in the span of 10 minutes. Finally, she sent a massive, paragraph-long text message. The tone had completely shifted from shock to blatant, manipulative backpedaling. "Liam, I've been thinking about us nonstop lately. I really feel like maybe we rushed the breakup. I was just so stressed with work and everything going on in my head. Sometimes relationships go through dark phases, and I think we owe it to ourselves to sit down and talk things through like mature adults. I miss you so much." The emotional whiplash was genuinely spectacular. This was the exact same woman who, just 4 weeks prior, had delivered a robotic, ice-cold monologue about how fundamentally incompatible we were, and how my boring life was stifling her personal growth. And the timing of this magical romantic revelation? It was beautifully pathetic. For an entire month, there had been absolute dead silence. She hadn't checked in once to see if I was okay. But the literal minute she saw a picture of a $500,000 house and realized the inheritance was actually real, my phone suddenly became the most important object in her universe. She left a voicemail after the 5th call. I listened to it on speakerphone while unpacking a cardboard box of kitchen plates. Her voice was trembling, sounding incredibly anxious and sweet. She begged me to meet her for coffee so we could clear up the terrible misunderstanding between us. Sitting in my spacious, sunlit new home, listening to her beg, I finally felt the absolute closure I had been waiting for. It confirmed every single suspicion I had the night I read those texts. I opened my phone settings, went to her contact, and hit block caller. I went to Instagram and blocked her account. I went to Facebook and did the same. Just like that, the frantic buzzing stopped. The silence returned, and it was glorious. Blocking Chloe immediately solved the primary issue. For a few days, I enjoyed the absolute peace and quiet, organizing my garage, buying new furniture, and setting up my new life. I figured that was the definitive end of the saga. But 4 days later, the situation took a turn into absolute absurdity. I was sitting on my back patio, drinking a cold beer, when I got a message request on Instagram from a private account. Normally, I ignore spam requests. But the username caught my eye. At Marcus. Fitness 92. It was Marcus. The ex-boyfriend. The guy she had supposedly left me to be with. Apparently, Chloe was in such a state of hysterical panic over fumbling the bag that she had actually enlisted him to fight her battles. The sheer irony of the man she cheated on me with trying to broker a peace treaty was almost too much to handle. His opening message was completely bizarre in its tone. Hey man, it's Marcus. I know this is weird, but I think it would be best if we talked man to man about this whole situation with Chloe. There's a lot of unnecessary drama and misunderstandings right now, and she is really messed up over this. I literally had to set my beer down on the table because I was laughing so hard. 3 weeks ago, these two clowns were exchanging laughing emojis over how I was a predictable loser who was about to get dumped. Now, this guy wanted to have a calm, respectful man-to-man dialogue to smooth things over. Before I could even process the ridiculousness of it, Marcus sent another massive block of text. Chloe is devastated. She feels like you intentionally misled her about the IRS audit just to test her. And that's seriously toxic, bro. She said you manipulated the situation to trick her into moving out. It's totally unfair because she said she definitely would have made a completely different decision about the relationship if she had known the inheritance money was actually safe. Reading that exact sentence felt like entering the Twilight Zone. The absolute lack of self-awareness required to type those words and hit send was staggering. Marcus was literally arguing that if Chloe had known I was rich, she wouldn't have dumped me to go be with him. The logic was completely self-defeating. He was actively advocating for a woman who only wanted me for my money, while simultaneously admitting she would have gladly thrown him back in the trash if my bank account was full. I sat there for 5 minutes, typing and deleting various highly sarcastic responses. I wanted so badly to point out the glaring, humiliating flaw in his argument. I wanted to ask him how it felt to be the permanent backup plan for a gold digger. But the more I stared at the screen, the more I realized that engaging with these people was a complete waste of my energy. They were toxic, greedy, and fundamentally stupid. I didn't send a single word back. I tapped his profile, hit block, and tossed my phone onto the patio table. 2 taps, and Marcus ceased to exist in my reality. After wiping Marcus from my digital life, the noise finally ceased. A couple of weeks passed without incident. I fell into a fantastic new rhythm. I loved the house. I loved the neighborhood, and the lingering sting of the betrayal was completely washed away by the immense pride of homeownership. Then came a sunny Saturday afternoon that served as the grand finale to this entire circus. I was in my front yard, wearing old jeans and a t-shirt, sweating profusely as I trimmed back some severely overgrown lilac bushes near the driveway. I heard the low hum of a car engine slowly rolling down my quiet residential street. I didn't think anything of it at first. People constantly drive slowly through suburban neighborhoods, looking for addresses. But the silver Honda Civic didn't pass by. It slowed to a crawl and abruptly parked right against the curb in front of my mailbox. The driver's side door popped open, and Chloe stepped out onto the pavement. For a split second, my brain short-circuited trying to figure out how she had managed to find my exact physical address. Then it hit me. In my Instagram story, I hadn't blurred out the distinct house numbers on the porch pillar, and she probably recognized the architectural style of the Oak Park neighborhood. She had hunted me down. She closed the car door and began walking slowly up my long driveway. She was dressed impeccably, wearing a floral sundress I always used to compliment, her hair perfectly styled. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly, but her eyes were locked onto me with fierce determination. I didn't put down my heavy hedge clippers. I didn't walk forward to greet her. I just stood there, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, waiting to see what kind of performance she was about to deliver. She stopped about 6 feet away from me. She offered a fragile, trembling smile and immediately launched into her rehearsed monologue. Liam, hi. I know I shouldn't be here, but I had to see you. The last few weeks have been absolute hell for me. I've spent every single day thinking about everything that happened between us, and I realized I made the biggest mistake of my entire life. She took a dramatic, shaky breath, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. I let the stress of my job and the confusion of our routine completely cloud my judgment. I panicked. I felt disconnected. And instead of communicating with you, I ran away. I regret the breakup so much, Liam. I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped caring about our future together. The performance was staggering. It was emotional, vulnerable, and completely fabricated. Noticeably absent from this heartfelt confession of undying love was any mention of Marcus. I stood there in complete silence for a full minute, letting her words hang awkwardly in the warm summer air. She shifted uncomfortably under my blank stare. She nervously looked past me, scanning the beautiful exterior of the house, the manicured lawn, and the spacious garage. The house is absolutely gorgeous, Liam. It's exactly what we always talked about. She took a tentative step closer, lowering her voice to a soft, intimate whisper. Maybe this fresh start could be exactly what we need. Like this house could somehow reset everything for us, and we could try again. That was the absolute breaking point. The sheer audacity of her trying to invite herself into a house paid for by the money she thought she missed out on was too absurd to tolerate any longer. I finally spoke. My voice was calm, flat, and completely devoid of warmth. Chloe, this conversation is over. You need to leave. Her delicate smile instantly collapsed into a look of genuine shock. She blinked rapidly. What? Liam, please, just listen to me. No, I interrupted, my tone hardening. I'm not going to listen to you. Our relationship ended the exact day you decided to pack your bags and walk away. You made that choice incredibly fast, and you made it with absolute, unwavering confidence. I respected your decision to leave me then, and I expect you to respect my decision to tell you to leave my property right now. Chloe's face flushed with anger, the sweet facade cracking instantly. It wasn't that simple, Liam. You manipulated me. The situation was so much more complicated than you're making it seem. You lied about the IRS. It wasn't complicated at all, Chloe. I cut her off sharply, stepping toward her. It was actually the simplest math equation in the world. I paused, looking her dead in the eyes, and finally dropped the bomb I had been holding onto for a month and a half. I read the texts, Chloe. She froze. The oxygen seemed to instantly vanish from the driveway. I know exactly what you said to Marcus that Tuesday night, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I know you called me a boring, predictable loser. I know you told him you were just tolerating me until my grandfather's money cleared so you could dump me and be with him. I saw every single word. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she was going to pass out. Her jaw literally dropped. For about 3 agonizing seconds, she opened her mouth, trying desperately to formulate a denial, a lie, an excuse, anything, but her brain was completely short-circuiting. She realized instantly that there was absolutely no way out of this trap. How did you? She stammered weakly, her voice barely a squeak. You fell asleep on my couch, I said plainly. Your screen lit up. The preview showed Marcus asking about my inheritance. I unlocked your phone, and I read the plan. Chloe stood there, physically trembling, her eyes darting around wildly as the absolute humiliation of the situation crashed down on her. The silence between us was heavy and suffocating. Finally, her shock morphed into defensive, desperate anger. You set me up. You printed that fake IRS letter just to test me. That is so incredibly toxic and manipulative, Liam. I actually laughed, a dry, humorless sound. It wasn't a test, Chloe. It was just a data point. I gave you a piece of false information to see what you would do with it. If you actually loved me, a delay with the inheritance wouldn't have changed a single thing about our relationship. But it did. You packed your bags less than 24 hours after you thought the money was gone. You proved exactly who you are. Chloe took a step back, tears of genuine frustration and embarrassment finally spilling over her eyelashes. She tried one last, desperate attempt to save face. I was confused. Liam, people make mistakes when they feel uncertain about their future. You can't just throw 3 years away because I had a moment of weakness. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. I agree, Chloe. People do make mistakes. But leaving me wasn't your mistake. I pointed the tip of my hedge clippers toward her silver car parked on the street. Your real mistake was assuming I would still be standing here, waiting for you, after you showed me exactly why you stayed in the first place. Now get off my driveway. That was the absolute end of the discussion. The finality in my voice must have terrified her, because she didn't say another word. She stood there silently for 3 seconds, her face completely pale, staring at the beautiful house she would never set foot inside. Then, she turned around, walked stiffly back to her Civic, got in, and sped away down the street without looking back. I turned around, walked back over to the overgrown lilac bushes, and went right back to trimming. Honestly, as I stood there working on my own property, the entire chaotic ordeal left me with one very simple, incredibly peaceful takeaway. If someone looks down on you and calls you a predictable loser, sometimes the absolute most devastating thing you can do is behave exactly the way they expect, just not in the way they hoped.